3. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest in the series of ValuesJam guest sessions. And Nirmala, it's great to have you here today. So to start with, please introduce yourself and tell us about the great work that you do.
Thank you, Alan, for having me. A pleasure to have this conversation on the ValuesJam. So, I come from the human resource space. So I worked with 4 large corporates and then gave it all up to set up my own business and started a company called Mind Movers, which is a good 26 years old. And and so initially we did a lot of work with the behavioral area in terms of trainings, in terms of processes and, running performance management stuff. And then over the years, I've kind of now zeroed down on doing just executive coaching. And so I'm a coach in the behavioral area because people amaze me. And a lot of people, especially techies who I work with, don't look at the fact that human beings also provide data. And that data is based on our behavior. And so I'm really enjoying that. And of course, over the years, I had Kindness Unlimited, which I co-founded as well, which is again 18 years old. And so while I was running the corporate, business thing, what kept me sane, I think, was Kindness Unlimited, because I could see the link between both worlds, where, balancing self-interest with a greater good would also make for a great employee. That's our definition of kindness. And if we talk of teamwork and we talk of all the big things that corporates talk about, it's all about, simple stuff, collaboration, cooperation, teamwork, getting things done. And so these are I was, of course, a part of I am still Kindness Unlimited, a member of the World Kindness Movement. And I, is being jokingly called the COVID president because I was there during that challenging phase. And so that's a little bit about me. I'm crazy. I have a lot of hobbies, gardening, just walking at random, meeting people, talking to people. I love public transport. I always come back very enriched. A lot of my colleagues I know miss that. So some kind of joys that I enjoy and keep me sane. Thank you for asking.
That's a great overview. And I noticed that you said just executive coaching or something like that, but these people are the people that need somebody like you and help from people like you to have the most positive impact in their roles.
It's a joy. Like tomorrow I'm finishing one of the, I do 13 sessions and I do a lot of it online now. But, when this particular person says, no, I got to meet you in person, and he was insistent and he set up this meeting. And I know it's because you touch people and and they kind of see differences. And it's just looking forward to the final meeting tomorrow and, closing on and seeing the learnings. And usually the reporting manager is also present.
Okay.
It's a triad as we end. Because I hand over to the reporting manager because I say, now it's your baby to take forward and both of you all to, as I say, tango along. And work. I'm always there. And sometimes they reach out even after the time is over. Because it is such a deep relationship, I can't explain. There are people I might know for years, but the way in that 6, 7, 8 months, you get so close to another person who tells you things he or she possibly has never said to anyone else. And I tell my family, you'll be burying me with so many secrets.
Yeah, no doubt it's a really important role. And sometimes underrated, actually. I think sometimes people give coaching a bit of a bad rap, but it can be so valuable when done well.
Absolutely. And, I somehow end up being all my years spending time with engineer because I don't understand a damn thing about engineering, but I have all these engineers who I've coached over. And they are the most, once they see logic, you see, and you can show it to them logically, oh gosh, they're the most committed, diligent people.
So let's get into the ValuesJam. And I'm just going to tip out the cards, and then I'm going to invite you to ask me to cut the deck. So how many piles would you like?
6.
6 piles, right, okay. And now a number between 1 and 6.
3.
Okay. And we've got 4 cards. So number 1, 2, 3, or 4?
3.
3. Well, let's see what you think of this.
That is the word. Yes, yes. That is the word. It's like just magical.
So let's get into it with the first question, which is, what does perseverance mean? And what does it look, feel, and sound like?
So, you jokingly say the so-called negative connotation for perseverance is sometimes stubbornness.
Okay.
So, so when you are stubborn about something in a positive way, right, that you think you have to chip away, and sometimes the process can be extremely slow, especially when you talk about something like kindness. You can't just give up. And so I have sensed it, felt it, been there, doing it, just going on and on with the hope and the belief that it will make a difference, even if a few people are convinced about the output or the outcome of what you would desire, right? And this I talk about in a macro framework. But I think even in a micro framework, if you want to write a book or you want to do something and you don't let the thought go out, but you start making notes, even though you may not, in my case, never really formally sat down. But I have so many stories running in my head of what a book could look like, right? And you just sit down and jot down and you persevere, saying, maybe someday I'll get it all together. And so that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a number of parallels. So it's this thing about just keep going, and not being deterred when things don't go the way that you want.
Yeah.
Like you say, not being in too much of a hurry, because if you're in a hurry, then if things are slow, you get frustrated, and then maybe you're tempted to give up.
Yeah.
And perseverance is absolutely the opposite of giving up.
Yeah.
I think getting up again as well when so I don't know why I've got this image in my mind, but it's of the sport of boxing. So if you get punched and you fall to the ground, you get up and you keep going. And then something about celebrating small steps of progress. That helps, I think, to provide the motivation for perseverance. Yeah. So it's this focus on not how far you've got to go, but how far you've come from. And what about metaphors then? What images come to your mind when you think of the word perseverance, or what sounds or what feelings?
One like chipping away comes to mind.
Okay.
Like if you had a saw and a huge tree.
Yeah.
You just do your bit today and then you rest. And some other time you continue the task. Right? You got to get this done. And also buzzing sometimes.
Okay.
So you're just buzzing around and yeah. What comes to mind is also a river. Yeah, because it's not like, a full force. It goes, it slows down, it meanders, it dries in some spots, it again spurts, it again springs, the monsoon comes, it's again flowing.
Yeah, and what you've described there is a kind of slightly gentler interpretation than when I was thinking of images, for instance. I think of a sweaty person and gritted teeth.
Yeah.
So yours is a bit more gentle. And you mentioned buzzing. For me, it's an incessant drumbeat.
Mm,
Just boom, boom, boom.
mm,
You just keep going,
mm.
and it provides the cadence for maybe others to follow as well, actually. And that's
Oh,
something about
a leadership role also deserves that because you can't just give up, right?
yeah,
You persevere with a goal that you're trying to, and that's why leadership is tough.
yeah.
Because you still have to enthuse others to persevere with you at times.
Mm. But so I'm thinking about you in a coaching session actually, and this topic coming up, and I can imagine somebody saying to you, I've tried all these things, none of them have worked, and I think it's time to move on, and it's done, and I've had enough. It's a really tough one because you don't know whether that person is on the edge of success or whether in fact it's true that it's now a waste of energy putting it into this thing that they've been
Oh,
doing.
oh,
So
oh.
how do you deal with that situation?
So remember that I have some background when I enter coaching, right?
Yeah.
So I have background from what we call the sponsor, the person who's investing, right? I have background of the 360 feedback and the other assessments that I'm doing, right? And very often, when it comes to this, I try to help the person look at it very holistically in the role. And also, by now, my clients know that if somebody is even quitting, right, sometimes it's in the best for all concerned.
Yeah.
It takes courage to acknowledge that it's better to have somebody who's upfront. And I've had two cases where people have quit during my coach.
Mhm.
So, and that's the thing that I sign up for, where I have to tell the organization that this is where we are heading. And and I also don't say anything with breaking the trust of the individual, right?
Yeah.
So the individual has to be told. And in both those cases, fortunately, it's worked out. I can only look at retrospect, right? I can look at 5 years. You can never know in that moment. That's the beauty, you can just connect the dots later on. But, in both the cases, it has benefited both,
Yeah.
So, and there are times you just take a pause and say, let's meet again after a couple of days
Mhm.
and see how you're feeling, because we are individuals, we come up with so many things happening in life, right? So then you understand the person's going through personal challenges and it's all coming together.
Mm.
Sometimes when it comes together, you can't really, focus on any one thing. So there are times I've taken long breaks and said, I think we both need to just, it's fine. We're not in any rush. And I think I'm fortunate that the clients understand where I'm coming from.
Mhm.
So I've never been pushed or pressurized, that and I mentioned that upfront, that though it may be 6 months, it could take more, much more.
Yeah.
The question is to get the results we desire, and behavioral change is not easy for anybody, right? So
And
it is.
that sounds like you're really focused on what the coaching is designed to achieve rather than get the sessions done in a certain time frame, because if you were to complete the sessions in a certain time frame but it wasn't appropriate, then it's a waste of everybody's time.
Yeah, and that's the mistake sometimes, when we look at the whole hustle. Like today my post on LinkedIn is on hustle. And it's like it can't always be a race, right? You got to persevere, and sometimes you'll go fast and sometimes it will be slow, and it's a human being you're dealing with. And I also meet the reporting manager thrice during this process. At the start, at the middle, and I'm always asking sincere help of the reporting manager. And I'm also encouraging their relationship to grow a lot in that process. So very indirectly, directly, the best things happen when these two can work out, because as Gallups will say, we don't leave organizations, we leave bosses.
Yeah.
Right? It's so true. So when I can make the person feel, you have permission to take the help of your, and he has given us that permission and you've seen it, right? I just feel sometimes, what am I doing? Not much,
So let's take another question from the cards. Where have you noticed a lack of perseverance?
In my own being, or
anywhere?
So I think in the voluntary space, people give up.
Okay.
Sometimes because you're not sure why they're volunteering. And so, you just got to take that, one fine moment somebody decides I'll volunteer, and the next moment I've opted out. Right? So I don't know where it comes from. I'm not too sure. But it happens a lot because I've been in this space for close to 2 decades now, right? Very few volunteers are very clear about why are they volunteering, what's in it for them, what do they hope to achieve, and are open about what they don't agree with, but persevere in the journey, even with difference of opinions, right? As a volunteer, what happens is you somehow feel you're not necessarily have to be responsible. In the sense, the word volunteer comes with a catch.
Yeah.
I would sometimes wonder whether we got to change that word to something better. Because I volunteer, I didn't feel like, I didn't do it, I came, I didn't come, I'm sorry, I had a headache. And here I'm waiting with 100 kids to get on the bus now. You haven't even thought of informing me in advance, getting new people. And with sometimes, people just will message. They won't even call. And you've not seen the message that the volunteer said, I'm not coming.
Wow.
And so that's a challenge I find as one example, because I closely work with the space.
Yeah.
How do you make volunteers? There's an ability to respond, responsibility. I may not continue my volunteering, but while I'm at it, I have a response.
Yeah. So, and there's also something about in that sector, I think there's a real need for the volunteers. And so perhaps mistakenly, the people or the organizations that receive the volunteers don't qualify them as well as they could or should. Because imagine if I said to you, oh, Nirmala, I'd like to volunteer. And you said, okay, well, before we sign up for this, we need to have a conversation. And this is the expectation of what we want from you. And if you can't deliver that, then it's best that you don't volunteer.
You're right. You're extremely right. And we've been stumbling, as I mentioned earlier, on Kindness Unlimited, where can we add value?
Yeah.
One of the things we stumbled on in our conversations with many founders and many people in the volunteering space is there a real need for kinder volunteers? And I say kinder, I mean, and how would we qualify them? How would we motivate them? How would we celebrate them? Because some come, even wanting, and there are many things, right? So is this program for the volunteer, or is this program for, the segment you're teaching? And that's a big thing you have to be clear. Because some programs are to make the volunteer a better person, right?
Yeah.
And it may or may not help the person you're actually volunteering for, but if it can be both, it's excellent.
Yeah.
So how does the induction happen? So sometimes I do corporate volunteering, right?
Mhm.
And in corporate volunteering, sometimes, people are serious. Sometimes it's just to have fun and have a day out. And everybody comes with different motivations. So how do you gauge that as well?
Yeah.
You're designing a program, right? Uh,
There's something else there as well about perseverance being the ability to remind yourself of what the purpose of what you're doing is. So I'm just thinking about a situation where you might be performing a task that becomes difficult to achieve, and you might be tempted to give up. But actually, what you need to remind yourself of is, what was that task in honor of, or what was it working towards? And then perhaps you would realize that there's a different way that you could go about achieving the same purpose rather than just giving up.
yeah,
Because otherwise
yeah.
you're actually not continuing with the end goal just because you're frustrated with something more short term and smaller.
Yeah. I just think, what you're saying is right. Volunteers find it easier to opt out because there's not much stake.
Yeah, it's free. I'm
I'm doing you a favor.
yeah.
If that's the output, then yes. So it's important to understand that motivation, and it is complex. Another thing on perseverance, I look at parenting. And just, being there as the child. It's such and especially if you have a corporate job and you still have to get things done, school goes on, exams happen, annual days happen, sports days happen, and work happens. And what's your priorities? Are you clear? Otherwise, there's a huge conflict, at least for mothers, definitely.
Yeah.
Right? So how do you persevere in that objective, right? And then the joy, if it comes out well, and if that perseverance has paid off, after 20, 25 years, you see a person who's able to stand on his or her feet.
You've reminded me of, well, first let me do the example of a lack of perseverance that came to my mind. And you touched on parenting, and before you had said that, this picture was in my mind. So my eldest son, when he was around 13, was learning how to play tennis, and he was just totally useless at being behind. If he was winning, he was fine. But the minute he went behind, you could see the body language that, just slumped over, not interested anymore. And it was, his attitude was, well, we might as well stop here. Goodness me. So that's some 17 years ago now. So gosh. And then just flipping to the other side of it, same context of parenting. I remember, the bedroom conversation with teenagers. And I think that's where I did show perseverance, actually, because I chose not to get excited about it if it wasn't done, but to be absolutely relentless and be saying, we did say that this would be the case.
It's a very tightrope balance.
Yeah.
It's very tight because you can't let it collapse this way or that way, and you got to be firm and yet kind. And it is a very different. And more and more, I meet young parents. So one of the thoughts we said was, should we work with parents when we talk of kindness, right? We've been exploring all kinds of groups, and because they have such a complex role, and it is not easy to parent, with world changing so fast.
Yeah. And especially when you consider that it's probably the most important role we perform, and yet
So,
we're given zero training.
zero training, and between the school and parenting, most of the world's problem could be looked at from its inception.
Yeah.
And everyone knows that from theoretically. But even schools and parents' alignment and all that is still a big challenge.
Mm.
And with personal problems that adults go through, which they can't manage, it affects families, right?
Mm.
So I think it is a difficult time, and especially COVID, where all the kids were on their devices. I think parents really struggle, because how much is how much, right? And the internet is not controlled. Everything, smoking, alcohol, your age of marriage, age of voting, everything has age, but not the internet. You just have to say yes to yourself and move ahead.
Yeah.
So, and when you give a kid a 10 data that a 22-year-old brain should have, you're actually messing up, right?
Yeah, and the other thing on that is that some of the conversations that I've had recently about COVID is that, and I saw recently, it's officially now, I think the UN or somebody else, World Health Organization probably, have declared that it is officially over. But you can see that the repercussions of it are by no means over, and it will probably take many years for us to heal properly. And yet some people seem to be blind to that.
Yeah.
And their attitude is more like, oh, COVID was when the light was switched off and now it's switched on again, as if there was nothing different that happened. So that, I think it's going to take perseverance actually for us
A lot of perseverance. And you talk to any teacher who has their heart in teaching,
Yeah.
they'll tell you how difficult, especially the first 6 months, was getting kids back to school.
Yeah.
The attention span wasn't there, and they just weren't there.
Yeah. And this is another really strange thing, but you wouldn't know this, but in ValuesJam conversations, what frequently happens is that memories from a long time ago pop up that for seemingly no reason. And it's just happened to me now, so I'll share it with you. I worked in a hotel, and the concierge desk had, I don't know what you call it, but where you have like a part of the desk that flaps up to allow you to walk through. It had one of those. And the guys, because it was easier, used to leave the flap up all the time, which I thought looked untidy. So I asked them, I remember the first time I said, sorry guys, but can you put the flap down until you need to go out or in, and then you can do that. So they did it. And then some days later, I noticed it was up again. And so I just said, guys, can you just put it down? And never did I kind of get annoyed or irritated, maybe inside actually, but never to them. And it was always, guys, can you just put the flap down? And then eventually I didn't have to tell them anymore. And the final bit of the story, I met one of the guys. It was probably a decade later, and he was working in a bar then. And I just went into the bar with a friend, and he was there, and we recognized each other and said hello. And then he said, "You were the guy that always told us to close it." So
the flapping guy.
The flapping guy. But that's perseverance as well. But I don't know what the difference is between, that really working hard perseverance that I initially thought of, and then this example, which is closer to your river.
The river, meandering around.
Just keep going.
And also with kids, well, since we were talking about perseverance, so sometimes you get angry because your kid should be phoning an aunt on her birthday. I'm just giving you an example.
Yeah.
And this it means a lot to this senior aunt if she received a phone call from her nephew. And you'd be saying it once, you'd be saying it twice, right? And then you tend to get angry. And then you say, you don't care, and she cares, and she's writing. And, so sometimes when you talk to kids, they just say, you just say it and move. Say it and move. Don't add this whole value angle to you are an idiot, you are never like that. That's what kids never respond to. So why don't you just be assertive and say in one sentence, it's the third time I've said, please call your aunt.
Yeah.
Right? And that's very difficult of me to not lose your cool. But losing your cool also doesn't give you the outcome you desire, right? And the whole relationship is spoiled and it's like you force this thing and so it's challenge. Another thing that I've never persevered with is swimming.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a phobia and I just imagine I'm going to drown. And I can float and it's still there. And it's there always at my back. Tried at least thrice with coaching. So I just go into the shallow end, but it's there. And I say, thank God I have something I have to finish sometime. It's been like 30 years or 40 years plan in motion.
Well, my equivalent of your swimming is riding a bicycle. I can't ride a bicycle. Okay. So when I was, I think it must have been 12 or 13, I didn't have a bicycle. We just didn't have the means. But a friend lent me his bicycle and I managed to get going on it, and then made the mistake of going on the roads with him and on the bicycle. And he was in front of me and we went around a roundabout and he signaled, he put his hand out. And so I did the same, but then fell into the car that was also going around the roundabout, and that shaped my confidence. And now I think the last time was probably about 20 years ago that I was on a bicycle, and I did manage to go straight, but then my family turned a corner, and
that was it.
I just took going.
Yeah. No. I kind of nearly drowned in 4 feet of water because that was my fear. Because this friend of mine who was learning with me kind of was drowning or whatever she thought, but she pulled me with her.
Oh, okay.
And I had to actually kick her to be free because she, the weight of her lead not helping me in a way, I had to come up. So I think somewhere, and that's the thing of fears, right? So if you take it metaphorically as well, our fears also stop us from sometimes on the journey that we give up.
Yeah. So in ValuesJam, there's also an opportunity to create your own question. So let me invite you to do this. Ask your own question about perseverance, beginning with who, what, where, when, why, or how.
So how would we get, let's say, the world's leaders to persevere on what's important for the greater good?
That's a good question, isn't it? Are you gonna have a go first, or are you asking me to have a go first?
You have a go.
I think there's something in them considering themselves not as the leader of their country, but instead as a member of the group of leaders of the world. And the reason I say this is because when I used to be in the corporate world, that's how I used to run my teams. When we would have, so for instance, budget planning, capital expenditure, I would ask the team to take off their functional hat and to wear the leadership hat. And I remember I was running a conference center, and it came down to two choices. Either we could buy new crockery for the meals to be served on, or we could spend the money on a digital version of the brochure, you know, the old-fashioned brochure we could digitalize. And I remember the chef saying, we can wait for 1 year for the crockery, and I think this is going to help the business enormously. And I'm smiling now. He's no longer with us, sadly, but I just remember thinking how proud I was of him to be so big, not to defend his own corner, but to make a decision for the greater good, which is where my comment has come from, I guess, in response to your question. What are your thoughts on that?
So a lot of what you said, but let's take a specific example like climate change or things that are so staring in the face.
Yeah.
And still we don't have an alignment and a focus, right? Even though we are at peril. So I sometimes wonder whether every phase in history has leaders that the world looks up to, in terms of not even leaders, countries.
Yeah.
You know, there's a country that's shining for whatever reason, you know. So I was just wondering if those 3 or 4 influential countries,
yeah,
if their leaders got together and decided this is something the rest of the world will just not be able to be convinced unless we lead, right? It has to come top down. There's some hope, right? Like say you had, let's say New Zealand, you had Jacinda Ardern, she was a smaller country, a smaller person, right? So you tend to just say, oh, you'll always have reasons. It's too small a country. It's easier to do that, you know. So I thought if those 3, 4 could really come and do something powerful with their own actions. The problem is there's a lot of words floating around.
Yeah.
Not backed by.
You're making me think about how, you know, perseverance sometimes is a strength, but actually, if it encourages you to believe that you've got all the time in the world and there is no sense of urgency, then it's no longer a strength. And one of my frustrations about the environmental thing is that it seems that people, not people, I guess, organizations in the looser sense of the term are not making bold decisions to do things now. You know, how often do we hear people saying by 2035, and it just seems such a long way away that who needs to do anything now?
But bringing back to your earlier point, you're right. So if you have shorter goals, which are time-bound and smart and measurable, sometimes are better than, you know, otherwise you don't see it and you don't see the results and you stop persevering because you give up. So there's a lot of people I meet who say, whatever you do, it's too late. Now, if you take that approach, you can't do anything, right?
Yeah. And the other thing in that space, and I think I've probably said this on other values jams, but the example of, you know, these massive factory ships that are on the oceans, just sucking up everything, basically. I don't understand why a bunch of people can't get together and say, that's not right. The maximum size we're going to allow is this, and it starts on this date. Everybody just work it out.
Yeah. So I think that's for the younger generation, that's very frustrating.
Yeah.
Because it's their world that they're going to inherit.
Yeah.
Right? And if they lose hope and they, you know, are not part of the solution and no one's really wanting to do something serious, then they could turn around and also become skeptical about change. And they are very interested in change compared to my generation, I guess.
Yeah. And you're making me think actually that they need to persevere with our generation, So it's, how could we equip youth to persevere with the people that have gone before them rather than get frustrated and give up?
That's the key. That's the key. Yeah.
Mm.
And because it's very easy otherwise that we don't see a ray of hope and we give up. So that's why I said you need leaders who can be that role model. Who, I see youth getting so enthused if they have a teacher who is, has that that energy that one teacher can bring to a school. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And as much as they can be rowdy and naughty and everything, but there you can actually see the love and respect they have, if not in front of the teacher, at least when behind the teacher, that they really admire that person. And it happens all the time. That initially they'll give you a tough time, but once they see what you stand for, youth understand who really is speaking from the heart, who really has their corner, has their back, communicate with them without having to be unkind, So I think the role of leaders all over, right, from parents to schools to corporates to then, we're talking of national levels, is a huge thing we're seeking.
You're making me also think about whether we give enough credit to perseverance. So when somebody is successful or has an achievement, sure, we celebrate, don't we? And we recognize them and we say, oh, aren't you wonderful? But actually, most of the time, what they focus on is what they have achieved, what they've done. But very rarely do people explain all of the trouble and all of the challenges that they had to go through in order to realize that. And maybe if people did that more, like you say, it would set that example for other people to follow, rather than a lot of people seem to think that they are owed success and expect it for nothing, really. So perhaps this greater recognition and celebration of perseverance would help. I don't know.
So, when you look back at the corporate world also, it's right now appraisal time in this part of the world and everyone's getting their performance reviewed. A lot of it is, not about the process on how you got the result, right? What was your behavior? How many people exited from your team? Very few companies really take all that seriously, right? It's all the metrics and the quarter to quarter. We still haven't got down to saying, 40% is about behavior.
Yeah.
It's about not just the result, but the process on achieving, right?
Yeah.
Then we wonder why we don't have cultures, what you would say an organization culture, of encouraging people who are also doing the right thing. And then you and I know that it takes a second to pull a company down today just because one leader has done not the right. It's such a heavy price to pay, and yet we've not built the culture to encourage people to do that, right? Each one of us is responsible.
And that's going to just become more and more the case, because in our world, we're so super connected now and increasingly transparent. And so secrets are harder to keep hidden away.
Very hard. And I think I tell young people that all the time. You have to be aware of this interconnected. The world is a village too.
Yeah. So let's draw this to a close with our final question. And what are you encouraged to do differently about perseverance as a result of our conversation today?
So I think I go back to the sector which has given me a lot of fulfillment, which is, those who volunteer for the greater good.
Yeah.
How do I work and find creative ways and creative role models to inspire those who work, right? Because when you talk to let's say a 30-year-old successful corporate leader who speaks about the joys of volunteer, And because they're always looking at success through a particular lens, right?
Yeah.
So I always give them the lens that they're seeking as well. And so I bring successful people who say that I've fallen and stumbled and been beaten up and I'm standing here in spite of it all. But if not for having done all this, I'd never been here. Would never have been here. It's because I have a holistic worldview, because I didn't stick to the gated community or school or the privileges I had. I went beyond that. As I engage my creativity, my innovation, my learning, my awareness just is not because I was privileged, I knew it, and I'm still privileged, but I've used that very responsibly, and I honor that privilege of giving, right? And so if young people can see people who openly talk about the benefits of persevering for the greater good, maybe we'd have hope and you'd have much more inspiration coming as to what's in it for me. I call it WIFM.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they got to see what's in it for them. It's not about just a moralistic, judgmental, good thing to do. It really helps. And when I talk to people, I've seen the benefit this opening up of their minds helps in a global world, an interconnected world, a world that's changing every second. I think it's a huge benefit to those of us who go beyond our narrow scope of what we're supposed to. It's a huge, huge benefit.
So there's two things that I'm thinking to do differently about perseverance. At the moment, I'm in the middle of writing a fourth book with a colleague, and it's kind of frustrating sometimes because you're going over each chapter as, in fine detail. And then if you change something in one chapter and it's related to another chapter, you need to make sure that you pick that up. And sometimes it feels a bit like a burden. But actually, this week, I'm going to consciously look at how far we've come from having nothing at all to where we've got now, rather than focus completely on what have we still got to do by the end of August when we have to hand it in. That's the first one. And then the second one, I think, is when I hear about a success, or even if I have a success, I'm going to be curious about what perseverance was required for that to have happened. Because thinking about it, I don't think I really pay attention to that very much. And yet, like we just said, it's a really important part of achievement and success. So Nirmala, thank you so much for our Values Jam on perseverance. And actually, thank you for persevering for us to get a date in the calendar.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And it's been an enjoyable, enriching conversation.
Thanks, Nirmala. Bye.
Thank you.